So the second part of this conversation that I really want to jump into that I hope will be beneficial to all of you is a discussion about commercial lease protection. So as I mentioned previously, we really have only grazed the surface in what needs to be done to support small businesses. Again, I do not sit here to proclaim that we've done everything that we can. No. So there is legislation that is pending to require, and I'll go through a few pieces of legislation, but I wanted to say that there's a lot more in the universe of legislation for commercial tenants than I'm going to be able to discuss in the time that we have today. And so if you are interested in whatever that legislation is, put that information in the chat and we will get your email and we will send that to you. So, okay. So there is legislation currently pending to require landlords to mitigate damages when commercial tenants vacate premises in violation of the terms of the lease, including Senator Liu's bill, which is S7053. Now, this is an extension of what we did in 2019. In 2019, New York State restored the duty of landlords to mitigate damages when a tenant vacates before the end of a lease term for a residential unit. This public policy decision is based on the very long-standing principle of the duty of a plaintiff to minimize damages, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. This frankly, very sound principle now applied to residential units. It is also good public policy to make sure that we protect commercial tenants from property owners who really make no effort to re-rent a vacant property or to minimize damages. I'm sure you're also familiar with these kinds of issues. Unfortunately, New York seems to be a very special place when it comes to real estate and those who own real estate, but that's okay. That's why you're all here, protecting the rights of those who are either renters or owners. So what this bill does is it removes the stipulation that the lease or the rental agreement must cover the premises occupied for dwelling purposes, and it extends the damages mitigation provision to commercial tenants, which is something I believe we probably should have done in 2019, but we have put it into this bill. Currently, it is common for commercial leases to include a provision. And so this legislation would extend the state policy, again, to commercial landlords and tenants on a uniform basis and addresses the issue now, making sure that, of course, it includes in that universe small businesses and commercial tenants so that they can really navigate the financial fallout of the pandemic and make sure that if they find themselves in a situation where they have to vacate the premises before the lease is up, that the owner or the landlord actually is taking these steps in good faith. This bill, probably not surprising to you, passed only the Assembly in July, has not yet passed the Senate. If this is something that you believe is important, which I believe is very important, and you care about this bill, I would really urge you to look up who your state senator is and to call them about this bill and do it in unison and don't just do it alone, because when constituents call about a certain bill, any elected office is required to take a tally, and the more people who call, the more serious that elected official knows that those who are calling are about the bill that is pending or whatever it might be, okay? So the bill is not yet passed the Senate. It was not even brought up to the Senate floor, and the bill is currently in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Senator Hoylman. And he is a senator that represents Manhattan. And so just on this topic of commercial lease protections, I also want to just reiterate that Governor Cuomo has extended the moratorium on commercial evictions and foreclosures until September 20th. So this measure extends protections already in place for commercial tenants and those who hold mortgages in recognition of course, the financial toll that the pandemic has taken on so many business owners, including retail establishments and, of course, restaurants.
Do you have any insight or foresight as to whether that September 20th deadline? I know we've seen a lot of the deadlines for evictions get pushed out almost on the residential side, almost until the end of the year. On the commercial side, do you have any insight on whether that will be?
What my best guess could be, my most educated guess, is that it will be extended perhaps again. And the reason I say that is because every time we get close to the date of the extension or the moratorium ending, you see a real unified and very, very powerful and very loud public outcry that I think, again, to the point I'm trying to make, it really does work when you're all over Twitter, when you're in the streets, when you're calling elected officials' offices saying like, this is not acceptable. But because this is an executive order, really all of that fire and all of that loudness and that organization has to be really aimed towards the governor, because he's the only one who can extend it, because it's an executive order. So my guess would be that it would be extended. However, let me just pause for a sec, because the governor recently announced, I think 24 hours ago, that indoor dining at a capacity of 25% will be permitted. So we'll get to that. But you know, if you are the executive and you're thinking about, well, if I'm allowing people to, you know, patronize your store or your restaurant or whatever it might be at 25% capacity, why do you need the extension for, you know, eviction? I mean, obviously I know why, and obviously you all know why, but I think we have to remain very vocal about the fiscal impact, the severe fiscal impact that these businesses will still even have at 25% capacity. 25% capacity with the overhead that so many small businesses have in the state of New York it can't even practically cover anything. And we know that, right? So I think that a reasonable person would probably lead to the conclusion that it could be and maybe extended, but it will depend. It will depend on who's paying attention and how loud and vocal everyone remains, because obviously we know the cancel rent with the Housing Justice for All Coalition is incredibly loud. They've included a lot of these measures in their organizing, and I think it requires more. It's there when it comes to, I think, any piece of legislation, whether it's now or later, any time that you have organized effort, you have a better chance of that piece of legislation or that specific policy passing or moving forward. If you don't, unless it's part of the zeitgeist of the day, which this is, it's harder because there's hundreds of pieces of legislation and policies and things happening on a regular day. And so I just want to orient us towards that. And that's why when people speak up, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful.
I want to just quickly piggyback on that, because I think a really important takeaway for anyone who listens to this is you don't need to sit back. You can call your state senator and push for this important legislation to get brought to the Senate floor. So many of our clients, our commercial tenant clients, are concerned about this bill. They're aware of it because, you know, we've made them aware of it, and now they're concerned about whether or not it will be passed. And so many of them are really looking at the clock, right? Time is so critical here. Every day is another dollar of rent, and they're trying to make a decision that's best for their business and their family as to whether or not they should try to salvage the relationship, stay in the cities, what they should do. So could you pull back the curtain for us a little bit and kind of link up how connected is calling your state senator to actually getting this bill to the Senate floor? Is there a connection there, and how powerful is that connection?
I would say that it is probably one of the most powerful actions that any human can take, and it's not exercised enough. What would happen if every single constituent, right, in someone's district was aware of the fact that there was a bill that could benefit that particular community, and they all came together and flooded someone's office? I'm going to give you an example of where this actually, I mean, this is a very extreme example, but it's an important example, okay? The repeal of 50A, which if you were paying attention a few months ago, which I'm sure all of us are, because you can't avoid just seeing what's happening around us. 50A was a section of the law that allowed for an opaque, really hard protection for police misconduct records. That's the most simple way to put it. The repeal of 50A would mean that we could actually reach in and see what police misconduct records were for each and every officer. The bill had been pending for decades. I mean, when I think about the fact that it was a bill that we would talk about, but it was like, yeah, right, like that will happen. And why? Because police unions are so powerful and vocal and strong. Now, we repealed 50A. And it was because in a 1 day period of time, each and every one of our offices received like 11,000 emails. Just think about this, 11,000 emails a day. I mean, tens of thousands of New Yorkers were emailing us. I mean, sometimes people email me from outside my district. It still matters. It's not like I just throw that away. We keep a tally. So taking that energy, I'm not saying you need 11,000 people to email, but what I am saying is that if you have 100 people, if you have 10 people, and then each one of you asks another to email that particular elected official, I mean, look at the bill sponsors. That's always the most important people you can start with are the bill sponsors, your elected official, and then what committee is that bill in, and look at the chair of that committee. That will make a dramatic impact. And then, of course, just to be very clear, any type of communication asking and demanding that legislation be passed, but asking the leaders of the Senate or the Assembly is also very powerful, because at the end of the day, even though we're a democracy, we have this really like old leadership, not literally the people being old, but the old structures of leadership, where the people who are deciding when the bills come to the floor are them. And so I'm working to change that, but until that time, they are still the ones in charge. And so understanding that power dynamic, right? Because what will happen is you'll call and say, I really want this bill to be passed, to a leader of either the Senate or the Assembly. And then what they will probably say, if they don't want to pass it, is, oh, you should really talk to the committee chair, which I know is just lingo for they don't want to pass it. So just keep these little, tricks of the trade in mind and put pressure on us, because if you don't, nothing really moves. And I think that feeling the heat from the people that we all represent is just everything, and scaring the people who are elected is good. It's not a bad thing. I think it's a really important part of how powerful all of you are, and it's not used enough.